totally live. Definitely a live show here on the BWI YouTube channel. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. Hey, everybody. So practice and camp this year, Greg, has been crazy.
Yes.
Normally, Penn State is a very structured program, and I'm sure that their structure is absolutely fine. But the way things have been going for camp, we normally have a schedule, and we normally stick to that schedule like clockwork. For years, it's been things happen on Wednesdays, and we talk about them on Thursdays. Saturday, there was an open scrimmage for the first time that under James Franklin that I've ever seen. And now practice availability is Monday night. And I'm off Monday because I wasn't expecting there to be anything going on Monday. So here we are, definitely totally live with you, 10 a.m. on YouTube. So, Greg, how you doing today? How are you holding up?
T. Frank, I want to point something out, and I think you could appreciate this. But when you talk about the structure of practice, so a lot of people always ask, what is practice like? What do you see at practice? What do you do at practice? This was, as far as I'm concerned, it may be yours as well, I believe, our first chance to see a whole practice. And guess what? It is very structured. And I think you can probably talk more about that. But people always say, what is practice like? What is practice like? And guess what? It looks very much like any football practice you would see from peewees to the pros.
Looks a lot like this. You know, what we see during practice, like I promise, we're not hiding the good stuff week to week.
Yeah, right.
This is, you know, they go through positional drills. All of these are fundamentals for, hey, that's a play action. Get back to your drop into your zone and go catch the football. Undercut a route and catch a football. Like, they're practicing these things so that they happen like second nature, but it's not the most interesting thing to see. And, of course, you know, what we did get to see was one of the things that we got to see for the first time ever is the actual scrimmage part where they go head-to-head. They had the ones versus the ones, the twos versus the twos, the ones versus the twos. And, of course, like, we weren't allowed to film that part of practice. So, but the majority of what practice is special teams, positional drills, and then a couple of, like, offensive skeletons. And I think the one thing we really didn't see is, like, 7-on-7, which is, you know, you're not going to scrimmage and do 7-on-7 at the same time. So if you check out our weekly practice highlights, what we get to see, the availability that we get that's the majority of practice. Like, so you're absolutely right about that. And you know, just when it happens is the difference so far this year during Penn State's training camp.
Yeah, it really is, T. Frank. And as you know, you wrote a story at BlueIllustrate.com. Nate did. I did as well. And we covered really everything that we could film and could not film. But yeah, that's the funny part to me, T. Frank, is that there is this perception that Penn State football practice is something that is secretive and upper level and, you know, blah, blah, blah. But no, it's really just what, if you're watching on YouTube, just what you're watching right now. It is very fundamental based. It is very, you know, positional based. And there are some team periods. There are some special teams periods. But at the end of the day, you saw it, T. Frank, and you've seen them before, and so have I. But it is very much very fundamental focused, and that's what most of these practices are. But I will say this, T. Frank, I thought it was very cool that Penn State opened up a practice to fans, and unfortunately the rain really kind of took away from the fan environment because there was a kid zone, there were food trucks, there were things like that. But if it wasn't for the rain, I think it would have been better attended, but there were still hundreds of people there. And I really do think that this is a concept that will work for Penn State going forward. You know, James Franklin talked at Penn State Media Day about the fact that he wanted it to feel like a NFL training camp. And I know you've been to them, T. Frank, I have as well. And it did really have that kind of a feel.
Yeah, it had a big-time football feel, like football's back. You know, they have, by the way, they installed a new sound system, which is great. You know, just these little things that we've talked about of, like, upgrading the football facility and some of the things, like, they affect even us when we're at practice, because normally the speakers are on ground level, and they're very one-directional, and they're right in your ear. They actually
T-Frank, this is the point where you tell people your highlight videos are voiced over, because if they had the audio on with where we were, you couldn't hear anything. Yes.
Yeah, and they would be demonetized. Like, YouTube's very serious about music and people having their rights. So, like, the reason that we don't have the natural sound other than this week is usually there's music. There's very loud music simulating the environment that they're going to be playing in.
Yep.
So, like, all these little things that we're talking about here that may not sound a lot like football, these are very football things, like the sound, the environment. And I was really impressed with, like you said, the vibe they had going at practice, because it had that training camp feel. It had kind of a high school football feel, and James Franklin had said they wanted to do it down at State High
Right.
so they could have more bleachers and they could have more people around, but the situation didn't work with the renovation at the State High field downtown.
Yep.
So this was, other than a little cramped and the bleachers were pretty close to the sideline, I mean, it felt like a much more open than I was expecting, Greg.
The only thing I would say,
they do
T.
take
Frank,
it seriously. They do take
they-
that privacy seriously, and it
Yep.
felt like this was a big step for Penn State to kind of open up the doors a little bit.
the one thing I would say, T. Frank, was that the quietest Penn State practice you've ever been to?
Yes. Yeah, I would say so.
I mean, I know we usually only get like somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes, and it may be just that team period, but I would say that was the quietest Penn State practice we've ever been to.
You could hear everything, and it was great
Right.
because I could hear corrections for players during the scrimmage. So it was the one thing I would say is that you're right. The rain had an effect on both the practice and the fans, but I want to give credit to the fans because probably
Me
up
too.
until the end of the scrimmage where they were going 3s-on-3s, I don't think many people left. Like there was it was a steady driving rain, and fans sat there and watched Penn State practice. And I thought that was super cool that I just want to give a shout out to those dedicated fans because, Greg, I know you were out there in the rain, but I did not take my camera out in the rain. This camera that I'm looking in right now is my only camera. So there's no show and there's no highlights if that camera is damaged, and there's no replacing it. So I was not going to go outside with my camera. Also, I was hanging out with Nate, and we were watching from the doors. But
I was going to say, that's only
elements.
because I went out there because our good buddy, BWI senior writer Nate Bauer, went and got an umbrella out of his car. And then I walked out with it to watch from elsewhere. And you guys were hanging out inside. But, I would say this. For what Penn State did for that open practice, T. Frank, they really made it for the fans. And I will say that because we usually get a certain period of practice, the media, and we see positional drills and fundamentals and things like that. Very important things, obviously, for a football program. But if you were a fan and you came out to that thing, and if the weather, made you not want to come, I would highly advise, if they have it next year and the weather is better, to come, because if you were a fan there and you could obviously not record anything or take any photographs, but you got to see what a true Penn State football practice looks like. We don't see that, T. Frank. We see bits and pieces, and then we do interviews afterwards. But if you ever went to an NFL training camp or something similar, or high school practice, which is, not quite the same, but on the same line, they really did a nice job, I thought, of showing the fans exactly what a practice looks like, and also showing them, our linebackers are over here, our special team stuff is over here, our offensive line is over here, our quarterbacks and receivers are over there. And I think that's important because I think fans a lot of times, and even us in the media, think that, it's this, highly structured, they just scrimmage the whole time, right? I think that's the
it's all Oklahoma drills, and it's all 7-on-7, and everyone's hitting each other in the face the whole time. Yeah.
Exactly. And if you're fortunate enough to be able to attend that, or if you want to attend it next year, if they have it again, I think you saw what a true college football practice looks like. And I think that's instructive because it is a lot of teaching. You saw Manny, T. Frank and I were hanging around for a bit. You saw Manny Diaz teaching the linebackers. You saw Deion Barnes teaching the defensive line. The offensive guys were a little bit further away from where we were allowed to be. But if you were down that way, you could see Phil Troutline with the offensive line, or Mike Yursis with the quarterbacks. And I think it's a really neat thing. And I know why James Franklin said that they haven't been able to do it before, because they couldn't all get on the same page, in his words, of doing it in terms of the coordinators. But I think it's really instructive to show fans, T. Frank, what it looks like, what a real practice is like, and also what they accomplish. Like we saw, if you were there, you saw about like an hour and a half, almost 2 hours of scrimmage. And that's not a typical practice, right? Like there's a lot of 7-on-7 stuff that goes on and things like that. But if you were able to go out there last night, you saw that. And Saturday night, you saw that. And so, but I think the big thing is that there's a lot of stuff that goes on at practice that is very basic and fundamental, and that you wouldn't think goes on, but it does. And that is why when they get to game day, they're able, you hear James Franklin talk all the time about not thinking, but playing. And all the stuff that goes on this month and in spring practice is why they're able to do that.
Yeah, and that's a really great way to set the scene for what we saw on Saturday night. And we're gonna get into some of that, but I did think it was important, and it was good that we went over like what this initial reaction to this was, not necessarily jumping in right into plays that we saw and describing things that we saw on the football field, but also like what it was like. And I think that's
Right.
A great thing to do. We got to get to this quickly, and I shouldn't say quickly because they are the sponsor of the show and they deserve their time here on the show, and that is Alum Lodge. Brand new sponsor here on the show. Want to make sure that you know the best places to stay when you come to watch Penn State football, not the open practice, the stuff that they're using to get ready for West Virginia. So if you want to book a stay at a premium location, you're spending the weekend, RVs aren't your style. You want something that is attached to the ground. You and I think the same way.
Yep.
Airbnb, great. Yeah?
Yep.
Uh-huh. What about having an entire house with a concierge staff? AlumLodge.com strives to deliver customized service that meets unique needs of each guest stay, so they'll return time and time again. This could be your home away from home in Happy Valley. Prepare, shop, and arrange the home for the specifications that you want. There's a bunch of different locations in Bellefonte, Park Forest, close to Beaver Stadium. They got some stuff in Tough Trees as well. And the one that they have here that they're showcasing on the website, which you can see, is this beautiful, literally a horse farm, where you can go stay in the country, be in the T. Frank neck of the woods. Not that I live near this place. That's not what I'm saying, but this is my style of place to live. Have a little bit of land around you, play some cornhole, and then go over to the stadium. Check out alumlodge.com because they can get you that's a picturesque location. You drive in Friday night, you have a campfire, maybe you got a tin cup of something, and you talk to your friends. You invite people over. 6 people can stay in the house. It's a beautiful, large house. You can check it out again at alumlodge.com. So don't wait. Book your stay now. Reserve your spaces because a house is not a hotel. There is one of them. So call 814-424-3266 to book or pre-book listings that are not yet on the site. And that's the thing that I'm actually, I was curious about because I've been looking at this and I'm like, I only see one of the houses. Not all the houses are on the site yet. So you got to call to make sure that you can get the lodging that you want. So I'll give you that number again, alumlodge.com, 814-424-3266. Greg, let's get into some of the things that we saw because when I talk about like, oh, I want to see X, Y, and Z, I want to know about X, Y, and Z, some of our bigger observations, some of the more, I would say, important things, those are going to stay over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. We found out a lot of stuff about the third down defense, which I have been talking a lot about, analyzing a lot. I made an awkward joke with Chop Robinson asking if he could just tell me who was on third down on last Thursday, and now we found out. So BlueWhiteIllustrated.com for that stuff. But let's go through some players that stood out to you. Who is somebody that stood out during the practice that you think popped off the field to you when you were watching?
Yeah, I'll be curious to see what you think about this because one guy that we saw a lot of that we have never seen before in a blue and white uniform is Trey Potts. And the Penn State running back, obviously Penn State knows what it has in Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, but Trey Potts had a lot of reps last night, and I thought he looked. Remember when J-Ron Sider said in June that they changed his body a little bit, they changed his style a little bit, and obviously they know what Kirk Shiraka wanted and that Minnesota offense wanted, and they know what they want. And I thought he was a little bit slimmed down. He was. Look. Someone said something on the message board the other day because I think I described it as a third and short back, but 3rd and 2. He's going to run right through the hole. And we saw that T. Frank multiple times last night. He is a guy that is willing to go into, put his helmet down, and just put his pads up and run right through it. And I thought we saw that last night. So I think that Penn State got a guy out of the transfer portal in him that is not going to, he's not going to take reps away from Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. They're too good. They're too explosive. They're this or that. They're the other thing. But there's always a role for a third running back. And I believe the third running back last year was Kevon Lee, I think it was Kevon Lee. 25 carries. I think Trey Potts will probably double that this year. And there's a reason for that is because you can put him in I'm not saying it's always going to be third and short, maybe second and short, maybe whatever, fourth and one, whatever it may be. But
Yeah.
I got the sense, Steve Frank, last night that he's a guy that's going to put his head down and run right through the middle of the line, run between the tackles. And he fumbled once, and it is what it is. It was a wet night, a rainy night.
Yeah.
So what? But I really was impressed by seeing him in Penn State pads for the first time.
Yeah, so the fumbles were something that stuck out to me, and once again in the rain, some people were making the comparison to Northwestern, that game from last year. Now this wasn't a literal hurricane, but there were tornado warnings before the practice, so we weren't devoid completely of extreme weather on Saturday night. But yeah, the thing I'm a little concerned about is, again, Nick Singleton fumbled in the rain.
Right.
I'm not going to say this is a problem, but I'm definitely going to be watching Nick Singleton's ball security, and I think a lot of people, even from last year, that is something you could take away from areas he needed to improve. And I think that it's, again, any one practice you look at it, it's premature to say that's going to be a problem. But if that was something that's happening on a regular basis in practice, which I think we would have heard about at this point, that would be an issue. But I think the other thing, so Penn State typically comes into games with a plan of like what's the rotation, and running backs go by series. So I think he can take a lot of series in the Northwestern game. I think he can take a lot of series in the UMass game, Delaware, even West Virginia. Like, he can be a guy that is a valuable. It's the second quarter. You've run Nick Singleton 6 times in the first 2 drives. Now you throw in Trey Potts, make sure everyone's fresh, because Nick Singleton also going to be on kickoff, surprise. Just from everything that we've heard and everything that they've talked about, I think it's a realistic thing to think that Nick Singleton is going to be, taking kicks back too. So you want to get some of those valuable reps to Potts and get him off those top 2 guys, which we saw. The defense was the story of the day. We'll talk about the quarterbacks.
Can we go back real quick?
Sure.
Yeah. So 2 things I want to point out. Number one, I think Trey Potts is the kind of guy that you throw at Illinois in the fourth quarter and say, we're going to grind you out if we need to. But there was a point you made on the Lions Den message board, which of course is a premium part of our Blue White Illustrated subscription, about where Penn State's offense was working during the early part of practice, and then the middle part of the scrimmage, and then the late part. I think that's important for fans to know too, because I think there was a lot of stuff on social media here, there, anywhere that talked about what the offense was doing. Well, they were situational, and I don't know if enough people realize that.
Yeah, they were backed up, so they were working on backed up at the goal line. So the offense is coming out trying not to get a safety. And the defense has the advantage of the rain, and they're in a critical situation. They're backed up. So they were not like in the middle of the field having the full field to work with and playing with space and time and all of those things. Everything was fast for the quarterbacks on Saturday night. Now, when they did get to the middle of the field, the offense had a little more success, but the defense still was they were lights out. The people kept asking, like, what's wrong with the offensive line? And full disclosure is, like, we were standing 60 yards away. I was literally doing this with my hands so that I could, like, make fake binoculars. I couldn't see what was happening during the car crash of the offensive and defensive line. You see flashes of numbers and you see things like that. But guys on the defensive line as a whole, that unit in whole as a whole, they were the dominant force in the practice. The run game, Jordan Vandenberg had multiple plays in the backfield. Adisa Isaac was in the backfield. Dennis-Sutton, Amin Vanover, all those guys. They rolled 2.5 deep on the defensive line on Saturday, where they were the second team defense, and the second team defensive line was taking it to the Penn State offense. So when we talk about the depth of this team and the optimism of that, like, the young depth on the offensive line is coming along. There's no doubt about that. But the depth is on defense, where you've got linebackers, safeties, corners. You have so much talent on that side of the football, and it showed up. It showed up in a big way. Is there anybody else you want to highlight? I've got a couple on my list, but I want to make sure that we get to some of yours before I talk for 20 minutes.
I'll let you talk for 25. I don't care. No, when I look at this team overall, I thought one of the things that stood out was it was a practice built for the defense, right?
Yeah.
Because the rain was a problem and the conditions, the way they kept running things were not great. Keep in mind, Malik Mega made the catch of the session outside of Trey Wallace catching one down. But Malik Mega made a catch down the sideline that would have given the Penn State offense 1st and goal in the scrimmage. And they allowed that, and then they moved them back because they were working on third down stuff, and that was a second down catch. And so they took them right back to where they started, or they may have moved the ball a little bit, but this was a position or a field position focused practice. So I think some of the stuff that's coming out about the offense is it's not misguided, but and they didn't make very many good plays. Let's just be honest. I mean,
they weren't sharp.
No,
so
the one that I just
say they weren't very sharp.
No, you wrote it. I wrote it. There's not much that we can really point to, but I will say that catch that Mega made down the sideline on a Drew Aller throw was tremendous, and it should have set up first and goal. And instead, they went right back to where they started and started third down because that was what they were working on, which is fine. But the point being is that, there's a lot of stuff out there right now about the offense being this, that, the other thing, and the defense dominating. It's supposed to be a top 5, maybe top defense in the country. It should, but I think that's worth noting. Anyway, guys, it stood out to me. I know you wrote about it, but London Montgomery caught my eye. The Pennsylvania native. Yeah, Pennsylvania native freshman running back who's coming off an ACL injury. He looked the part to me. I thought he did some things that I personally wasn't expecting based on where he is expected to be on his recovery timeline. So he caught my eye. I know you loved King Mack, the safety out of Florida. I really thought he did some nice things too. And then when you look at the depth of the offensive line, there's just so many guys they cycle through there. And we're not used to.
Could you pick
Go ahead.
You had a different angle. You might have been a little bit closer than us. Could you pick anything out individually of like offensive linemen that stood out in a positive way? Were there guys that had good pass protection sets? And because I was focused on the secondary, like I'll just be honest, I was watching the pass patterns. I wanted to see what the safety situation and rotation was because that helps me inform what the quarterback is supposed to do. So I wasn't really watching the offensive or defensive line on pass plays. So were there guys that stood out to you up front that had good nights that maybe we didn't talk about?
I don't know if I would say that necessarily in terms of diving in on one guy or another. I think that again, it was a tough night for the offensive line because the offense kind of just struggled as a whole. Some of that was rain related, and I would if you went back and watched the film with Filter Outline and Mike Yursich, James Franklin, whomever, I'm sure you would find Ty Howe. I'm sure you'd find some pretty positive things, but just watching it all in one, big batch of things, not really. I thought one guy that jumped out to me though was Sal Wormley, and we know he's fighting to be a starter for Penn State, and is not. I shouldn't even say fighting. He is very likely going to be a starter for Penn State at guard during the 2023 season, and I thought he did a lot of nice things that showed that he is comfortable in the position he is in. And he is ready to take advantage of the reps he is going to have. So he was one guy that I kept going back to when I would watch when they put the ones in or if he mixed in with the twos, whatever it was. I thought he did a lot of nice things. And then, we talk a lot about the center position, right? And we know that Hunter Norzad is going to be the guy. But I thought Nick Dawkins had a lot of nice reps as a backup center from what we got to watch, Steve Frank. I really did. And I think that there's some Penn State fans out there on the Lions Den message board and elsewhere that are maybe a little bit concerned about what happens if Hunter Norzad would get hurt because it's part of the game, right? It is
a lot of them that I've talked to aren't comfortable with Norzad as the starting center because he was injured last year and he played through it and didn't look like a good football player. So the center position I think is a big concern for a lot of fans, maybe more so than it should be.
Again, injuries are a part of the game, right? And it only takes one to totally derail things. I mean, think if Olu Fashanu went out, or think if you can go down the list and talk about possible injuries that could derail this team on offense in 2023. But I do think that Nick Dawkins showed some things last night that were encouraging. Obviously, Vega Ione I've never pronounced his name right. Iwani, I know you know it. You got it.
So this is the thing is from when I read it and what I heard when I got an audio recording from you where he pronounced it Vega Yawane.
Yes.
And no one pronounces it that way, and I haven't asked him specifically. So your guess
we're
is
gonna
as
go
good
with
as
that.
mine. Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna go with that. But
everyone calls him Venga, and I'm like, where's the N? I don't understand. So I don't know.
Yeah, a fun story about that. I talked to him at the Rose Bowl, and he said that his Vega is his abbreviated name,
Yeah.
and if you would actually pronounce his full name, that's where the N comes from. So I learned that as well.
Okay. All right.
Yes, because I remember there were a lot of talk about when James Franklin started calling, like late November when he was asking press conferences. They were asked about that, and people were like, "Well, where's the N?" But apparently, that's where it's come from. Anyway, he can play little center. But Nick Dawkins and Hunter Norris, I think they're okay at center. I really do.
Yeah.
And I know that you make a great point that a lot of Penn State fans are a little bit concerned about the fact that Hunter Norzad has and maybe could in the future play through injury, but any guy could do that, whether it's offensive line, receiver, running back, tight end, linebacker, whatever. So I think that the key, though, is that when you look at that position, I don't feel like it is much of a concern as maybe some fans had, and I certainly had too. I was wondering, I remember listening to Juke Scruggs at Rose Bowl Media Day, and he was like, "Yeah, you're not going to believe what Hunter Norzad can do, this, that, and the other thing." And sometimes you think to yourself, "Well, what else are you going to say? He's not going to stand at Rose Bowl Media Day and say, yeah, the guy replacing me stinks, right?" But when I listened to him, listened to Yursich, listened to Troutwine, and then watched practice in the spring, and then also recently, I think Norzad's going to be fine. But if there was ever an injury situation, I'm not saying Nick Dawkins is ready to completely replace him, but I like what I saw.
Yeah, that's a fair point. We're going to get to the quarterbacks. It's 26 minutes in. It is a cardinal sin that we haven't talked about the quarterbacks specifically.
How many highlights do you have of them from last night, Saturday night, T. Frank?
Zero. I have zero photos. I have zero pictures of Drew Aller throwing any sort of football. But what I do have is an invitation for our fans to go to the season opener, go to the best, most exciting atmosphere in college football with Tixman Gym. Have you been looking for a reliable source of Penn State football tickets? Jim at TixmanGym.com, formerly PSUTixman.com, has been running his ticket exchange in Wilmington, Delaware for over 25 years. Every buyer handled with courtesy and respect. Every purchase is guaranteed. So call him at 302-521-8380. Again, proceeds are used to fund the PSU AA Chapter Scholarship Fund and the PSU Levi Lamb Fund for athletic scholarships. We also should get a fund for Greg to get whatever's going on with his cough there sorted out as well. Yeah. Greg, are you're with us here behind the scenes? You're still alive?
Yeah, T. Frank, that's called a poor use of the mute button. Yes.
So get your home opener West Virginia tickets, your Iowa whiteout tickets, homecoming, stripe out home games galore, all of them. Go to TixmanGym.com, or I'll give you it again, 302-521-8380. We've been talking so much at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com about how well Drew Aller has been doing in camp. I'm going to say this again. Drew Aller has been exceeding expectations. He has been looking excellent in camp. And maybe I shouldn't even say exceeding expectations, maybe just hitting expectations. Last night was not a great night for Drew. It wasn't a great night for many of the quarterbacks. I thought actually Jackson Smolik looked the best, kind of in that everything that we've heard about him and all the things that we've, again, reported at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com last week, that we saw what they were talking about in kind of the behind-the-scenes stuff. He had a beautiful throw on a deep in route to Caden Saunders. Unfortunately, with the rain, wasn't a great night for the receivers. Lots of drops.
He did throw the touchdown to Joey Scheffler in the back of the end zone, but to me, that was his best throw of the night for sure, T. Frank.
Yeah, he does a great job, and he has, going back to high school, looking at his film, of being able to read the defense and hit windows down the field. Like, this is what I'm talking about when we talk about some of the issues with certain quarterbacks in college is, like, I'm going to do the thing that I'm not going to get in trouble for. So the safe thing is to check it down, or the safe thing is to throw the underneath route, even if it's incorrect, because it's not going to be intercepted. You're not trying to push it into that second or third window or to your right read. Like, honestly, just throwing it to the right read, he throws with anticipation, and like all of those are great. If he doesn't know the offense just yet, all of those hallmarks are great. Some of the stuff that Drew was doing, obviously, is a little more advanced. He's a little more in command of the offense, but his accuracy was a little bit off last night, I thought. I thought he rushed stuff, and this is something that I've been concerned about with his footwork and kind of where he is on his journey, is when he gets sped up, the ball can be off. Now, he threw some great throws down the field that were just not caught.
Well, that was going to be my question to you,
Frank.
Frank.
I didn't really like.
Yeah, that was going to be my question to you. How many passes do you think were deep passes of the ones he threw last night? Would you say 75%, 80%? It felt like almost every time he went back, most of them were going downfield.
Given that he didn't actually throw a whole lot, yeah, maybe it's higher than I think. But we're talking about like maybe 6 passes total out of 12. So I mean, I don't think he threw the ball 20 times last night from what I recollect. The problem was
That's because it was an open practice. I'm convinced
yes,
it was an open practice. Yes.
So it's just like the easy things, right? So you've got a throw on a screen out into the flat, and the receiver has to jump to grab it. That's not great. That ball needs to 9 times out of 10, that ball needs to be on target. Now he did better on the second time, and that play worked better. But like it's just kind of some of the stuff with Sean Clifford. We if you watched him during the Packers,
oh boy,
game,
you're gonna really upset some people.
I'm not comparing
even
the
going
two.
there, T. Frank. You kind of started to.
I'm saying that something that has been classically a problem with Sean Clifford is the easy stuff isn't always easy. He had a lot of naked bootlegs that he just beefed and threw at the feet of the Packers receivers. So, like, my point is that the stuff that you should complete 90% of the time, you have to complete it 90% of the time. That would be the only thing I was concerned about. Deep targets, like those can be tough. One of them, Khalil Dinkins, didn't get his head around in time. And like the receiver jammed, or the defender jammed him up a little bit, and he didn't get to where Drew thought he was going. There was another one that Drew was trying to loft over the corner, and Kalen King got it at the high point.
That play Kalen King made was probably the play of the night in terms of the scrimmage.
It was phenomenal.
It was. I mean, and that's one of the things to keep in mind, too. You're 100% right, is that they're playing against a very elite defense. And if you didn't see, I guess most of you listening or watching this didn't see that play because you probably weren't there, but that was an elite play by Kalen King. I mean, if you were watching that in September, October, November, you'd be out of your chair, whether you're at Beaver Stadium or on your couch or recliner or whatever it was, going nuts because it was an incredible play. I think what's hard for me, T. Frank, is that I agree with everything you just said. The problem is it's only one practice for us, right? So we only see, we being the media, the people that go to the open periods of practice for the interviews, we see 10, 15 minutes. Almost all the throws we see are on air. That was the first scrimmage. I think we see first scrimmage we've seen since the blue-white game, obviously earlier this year. But I don't want to draw too many conclusions. But at the same time, I think that we should revisit this conversation in late September or maybe even middle September. I don't know. But I think we need to see what Drew Aller does in an actual game setting. And maybe that's not enough of a sample size either. Last Saturday night certainly was not. But, but you're 100% right. It was a tough night for the offense. There's no question. 1, 2, 3 teams. They didn't get much going. There was again, this is an elite defense. James Franklin talked about this at Media Day, the fact that they are going against one of the best defenses in the country. So it's not crazy to think that the offense would struggle. I would, and no disrespect to West Virginia or certainly not Delaware. And some of these other teams are going to play early in the year, but you would think that when they get out there against West Virginia in primetime on September 2nd, T. Frank, that things might go a little bit better than they did going against Chop Robinson, Kalen King, and all the guys in that defense. So I'm not ready to call a whole lot of judgment on what we saw on Saturday night. At the same time, it was a tough night for the offense. There's no question. So I think some of the consistency things is what maybe jumped out to me. There was not the consistency was an issue because there was none. It was all pretty much 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out.
Yeah, and so you bring up a great point. Just in general, I was doing a little bit of work on West Virginia before the practice yesterday or on Saturday, and they are a very different defense. So one of the other things we're going to talk about, and some of the things we have to understand about this conversation too, is because they're in third down and because Penn State's defense is what it is, and their hyper man coverage. Those were tight windows that we're asking in the rain at night to be able to thread the ball into. When Penn State's offense had a chance to breathe and there wasn't pressure or tight windows, Liam Clifford was very good. I thought Liam Clifford was really good in terms of being able to settle into a zone and find an opening and just catch the ball. And this is something I talked about with Marcus Hagans and how I think he's really taken to Hagans' coaching of like, being in position to catch the ball, having your hips square, having your hands out, and then turning upfield as soon as possible. He was hard to bring down when he had the ball in his hands, but the defense rallied so well. So even like a good catch for maybe 5 or 6 yards, that's not really doing a whole lot when for most of the night the quarterbacks are on the run and scrambling. And when we talk
that
about
defensive sideline was loud too, T. Frank.
Yes, they were letting everybody know about it.
Yeah, they were making no mistakes about who was winning that, any play, any portion of the scrimmage, whatever. That's a pretty charged up sideline for sure.
Yeah. That's the sideline we were closest to, and I was hearing quite a bit of confidence. I'll leave out the details.
Good way, good way to put it. Yeah,
a lot of confidence from that group.
Good way to put it. Yes.
So we've talked about the quarterback competition, right? And talking about Drew Aller and his night, and you can see, I think, at times, what's going on here. And one of the insights that I saw from yesterday, and this is unfair. I'm just going to say this, just like I prefaced the whole thing with Aller of like, he's been great during camp. That was not his best night last night. On Saturday night. Definitely on Saturday night. This is totally live on Monday morning. Pribula, from what I saw, and it's so fast, and this is unfair, but it felt like he was turning down some options to just run the football. And that does concern me a little bit because I think he's a good quarterback, and I think ultimately he's a guy that's going to win with his arm. But if that's kind of his natural rhythm of, I don't totally trust it, I'm going to run with it, he had Keandre Lambert-Smith open in the flat on one that I thought he could have thrown. But again, it's fast, and I'm 20 yards away. Maybe there was a linebacker underneath that I didn't see that he did. But I just I thought struggled more so than the other two quarterbacks in finding his target. If it wasn't a predetermined play, he had a really good throw on a bootleg. I think it was to Trey Potts.
It was. Yep.
Yeah,
exactly.
Fourth down conversion, just like between two defenders, so he can do it. But I do think from that perspective, I was a little concerned. That's something I will watch later to see if that's something that kind of is a thread line in his play, that maybe he's trusting his legs more than his arm, or maybe it's just more so on that side.
So T. Frank, one thing I'll say about that, this may be the dumbest thing ever said on the history of BWI Live, but
I doubt it.
No one, well, I've been on the show a couple times, so you're right. But when you look at the way they blow a play dead when the quarterback runs and someone just taps him on the arm, because it's obviously you can't hit the quarterback. It's all touch tackle. There's a part of me that wonders if Bo Pribula was like, well, I'm going to try and stay in here and make a play, because if I run up the middle in a real game, he may have run right by that guy, the defensive tackle, the linebacker, whatever. But as soon as they tag him off, that's it. That's it. There's no more running down the field. There were a couple times, and I'm sure you saw too, where he turned around kind of with that look like, come on, like I wasn't touched. I wasn't going to be tackled. But that's the way it works when you're in college and you're not going to hurt your quarterbacks, obviously. So there was a little part of me that wondered if that smart way of running practice wasn't impacting the way he typically plays the game.
Yeah, and he ripped off some long runs too. Like I'm saying that, like, maybe I want him to throw a little more, but when he's pressed and he's got to make a play and he runs and he gets 30 yards when the offense is getting nothing, like I don't want to come off as too critical that like these are just observations out of context, truthfully, without
and in real time too
of camp in real time. And the whole point of us not being able to record anything is I can't go back and watch and see like, okay, that's what I missed.
Exactly.
But things I did not miss, and this is, I guess I'm not totally surprised because I don't think the first team went up against the first team early and they got good work in, but we saw primarily the twos, I felt like last on Saturday night. So young guys were at the forefront. You mentioned King Mack. I just want to circle back before we end the show because King Mack is the real deal. I love this kid's film. I thought I said he could play 3 or 4 different positions in the defense depending on what down it is and how he develops. And then I got to thinking to myself, like, maybe that's a little bit much for a guy that's 5'9". No, forget that. This dude can hit. Talk about Trey Potts. He took Trey Potts and took him to the sideline. This is a freshman against a redshirt senior running back, a Big Ten Minnesota running back, and the hit had an impact from a freshman. So he's got the speed, he's got the violence in him, he's got the instincts. He got a strip sack where I think he hit the quarterback and he wasn't supposed to. So he made a lot of plays.
Yeah, it
Closed
was
on a
kind of,
lot of stuff.
again, it was one of those like, oh, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. Wasn't me,
Definitely,
coach.
definitely didn't hit his arm.
Yeah.
Maybe separate a shoulder, maybe hurt an elbow. Definitely didn't touch the quarterback.
He most certainly had that look on his face, T. Frank, who was like, I didn't do it. It wasn't me. I certainly did not do that. Yes.
But on that play, he was rushing on a tackle. Like he's
it's hard.
5'9",
It's hard. Yeah. Yep.
And he bent the corner on a tackle. Now I think it was a freshman tackle, but like I was so impressed by him. Other guys, that I thought were good. Tony Rojas, he had a forced fumble that the defense recovered early in practice. I think he's going to be I think he plays this year. I don't think there's going to be too much of a keeping him on the sideline. I would be surprised if he keeps his red shirt this year.
Injury only to me, T. Frank.
Yeah.
Really, truly. And then when you talk about King Mack, he was the guy that I wanted to see in person because obviously with him coming up from Florida and him getting here a little bit later than some of his classmates, we had BDI publisher Sean Fitz and senior writer Nate Bauer. They had talked about for a while now how they were being told that this was a guy that could really do it, but we saw it last night. And we talk about Tony Rojas not burning his red shirt. I would be really surprised if King Mack doesn't burn his as well.
Yeah. And that's crazy considering that they have so many safeties already, and there's room maybe in the defense for a guy like King Mack, and maybe it's more of a Cam Miller role in terms.
I think you nailed it. I think you hit it right on the head. Yep.
Yeah. Yep. So that's going to be that. They just got so many numbers. I know corner is thin after the top two, but they have talent. They just need to get it up to speed. And seeing how much work those young corners and safeties got the other night. Got to see Tyrese Mills play football. Quiet night from him, but I finally got to see him play football after a year
back
and a half.
Back at safety, too. Yeah.
Yep. And anything before we end the show here, with just a couple more minutes, any other guys you want to highlight, any other interesting things that stuck out to you?
No, I think that when we go back to the receiver conversation, we've seen a couple times now during camp that Malik Mega, he dropped down the depth chart last year. He was obviously pretty high up it when the season began in 2022. I feel like he really dropped down it last season. He was doing some special teams work, but it was kind of iffy on the receiver stuff. We've seen him do some nice things so far in preseason camp. So if you want to pick one guy who is maybe under the radar or maybe is not being talked about in that receiver conversation, we talk about Dante Cephas, we talk about all these other guys, and they very well may end up being the second, third, fourth, fifth guy. I think he's one to watch is someone who could surprise us in terms of the number of snaps he gets.
They are certainly trying to find something at that receiver position. And as you mentioned, not a lot of passing of the football the other night. James Franklin opening the doors, welcoming everybody in. But I think that on top of the script for the other night, also the weather, like nobody wanted to have their cell phone out. Nobody wanted to have anything out trying to record anything they weren't supposed to when it was the
you either were going to have your phone ruined or you were going to not break the rules. It was up to you.
Yeah. So overall, I think that was a great first opportunity. I was really happy to see all those things. Like I said, we learned quite a bit. We all have our impressions over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com that we put up Saturday night. You can go check those out. We have more stuff coming up. Penn State football has open availability tonight, so you're going to hear more from what Greg learns Monday night from the Penn State football program as they talk to the media on Monday, a couple days after their open practice. So make sure you go over there for that. 25% off, by the way, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, so that you can get in the inside information and we can have the conversation backdoor, behind the scenes, and we don't have to be talking around it here on the YouTube show. So, Greg, thank you for giving us your time tonight, today, this morning, definitely this morning. Appreciate it, buddy.
Hey, you got it, buddy. Anytime.
That'll do it for today on the BWI live show. We'll be back later this week, most likely, to wrap up what we got going on. We'll talk to you then.